They say the movies can make you forget who you are, but for me, it was the movies that reminded me I was still here. Los Angeles, 1949. The war was over, the men were home. And the world was dressing up again. The city smelled of gasoline, coffee, and hope. Everywhere you looked, someone was trying to be discovered. Faces in windows, voices in diners, dreams in every reflection of a shopfront glass. I wasn't one of them. My name was Marlene Foster, and I poured coffee at a diner off Sunset Boulevard, the kind of place where the floor squeaked, the sign buzzed, and you could taste the Hollywood dust in your pancakes. Every morning, actors, writers, and men with slick hair and gold watches came and talking about the next big picture. I refilled their cups, smiled politely, and thought about how ordinary people like me never made it into those stories. Until the day they did. It started on a Thursday when a film crew came into the diner asking if they could shoot a quick scene. Something about a soldier returning home, hugging his sweetheart. They needed extras to fill the background, people eating pie, sipping coffee, pretending their world was small while the camera made it grand. The assistant director pointed at me. "You, sweetheart," he said, "you've got the right look. Just stay behind the counter. Keep doing what you're doing. Natural." I laughed. "I've been doing this for 5 years. I can manage natural." They put up lights so bright they turned the chrome surfaces into mirrors. I stood there, hands trembling just enough for my boss to notice. When the camera rolled, a young man in uniform walked in, the bell above the door jingling like every memory I'd been trying to forget. He looked just like James, my James, the one who'd written from France, promising to take me to the movies when he got back. He never did. The director yelled cut, but for me, something inside hadn't. The scene lasted barely a minute, but the sound of that bell stayed with me for days. Everywhere I went, I could hear it, that little chime of what could have been. A week later, a man from the studio came back to the diner. He wore a brown suit and had the kind of voice that made everything sound like a deal. "You were good," he said, "real. Like you'd lived it." I didn't act, I told him. He smiled. "That's exactly why you worked." He asked if I'd like to come to the studio for another small scene, nothing fancy, just atmosphere. I said yes before I could stop myself. The next morning, I walked through the studio gates for the first time. It was another world, fake streets under real sunlight, walls that didn't have backs. Laughter that echoed from nowhere, but I loved it instantly. The air smelled like sawdust and makeup. The ground vibrated faintly under the weight of imagined worlds. They gave me a plain dress, nothing too bright, and a little compact mirror to check the shine. I looked at my reflection, the same girl from the diner, just framed differently. When the director called action, I stood in the background while 2 stars kissed under a paper moon. The camera panned right past me, but somehow, I felt seen. That night, after the shoot, I sat in my small rented room on Franklin Avenue, watching the lights of Hollywood flicker outside my window. Somewhere down the hill, people were drinking to fame, to money, to being remembered. Me? I drank to pretending, to the strange comfort of playing someone else's life when your own felt unfinished. I didn't know it then, but that one silent, blinking moment on film, that one accidental frame, would outlast everything I ever thought I'd be. Me. Because years later, when the reels aged and the actors faded, my face would still be there, blurry in the corner of a scene where a soldier comes home. And for a second, just 1 second, I would still be alive, caught forever between action and cut. The second time they called me in, I wasn't nervous anymore. The set was warmer now, familiar, like a dream I'd already had but couldn't quite remember. This time it wasn't a diner. It was a train station built out of plywood and paint, where soldiers said goodbye and women clutched their gloves so tight you could almost hear the seams give. "Just walk past the camera," the assistant said. "Look lost, like you're waiting for someone who never shows." I wanted to laugh. That wasn't acting. That was remembering. When the director called action, I crossed the platform, my shoes clicking against the fake marble floor. Somewhere behind the camera, someone cued a gust of artificial wind. It caught the hem of my dress, made it flutter just like the last day I'd seen James. I stopped for half a second, too long, and the director shouted, "Perfect. Keep that, perfect." That's what they called pain when it looked pretty on film. After that, I kept getting calls. They said I had a face the camera liked. Sometimes I was a woman on a bus, a nurse in a hallway, a silhouette in a window. Always watching, always waiting. I never had lines, I was never meant to speak, but I didn't mind. There was something comforting about being seen but unheard. Like life itself had turned down its volume just for me. One day, while shooting a scene for a new war picture, I noticed the lead actor fumbling with a letter prop, the same kind soldiers used to read on camera with trembling hands. When he handed it to the actress beside him, she smiled too soon, her jaw rehearsed, safe. Something in me broke a little. That wasn't how it looked. That wasn't how it felt. Between takes, I found myself staring at the paper, at the neatly folded edge. The director caught me. "Something wrong, Marlene?" I shook my head. I think the letter should look worn." They always were. He looked surprised, then handed me the prop. "Show me." So I did. I crumpled it gently, folded it twice, ran my thumb along the crease the way I used to when I read James's letters. The ink smudged just enough to look real. The director nodded slowly. "You've been around real stories, haven't you?" I smiled faintly. "I lived one." After that, he started asking me small things. How women held themselves waiting at the docks. How they smiled when they didn't mean it. How they hid tears when cameras weren't rolling. I became the invisible memory behind the script. They called me Miss Real. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Months passed, the studio. Lights became my seasons. Outside, Los Angeles shimmered under constant sun, but inside, I lived in shadows, painted towns, paper skies, endless goodbyes. Each film blurred into the next until I couldn't tell which emotions were mine and which belonged to the roles. Then one evening, after a long shoot, I walked through the backlot where they stored old props. There was a fake house from a movie I'd worked on months earlier. Through the dusty window, I saw the kitchen table still set for dinner, plates, glasses, 2 chairs facing each other. I stood there for a long time. In my mind, I saw James sitting there, smiling. In my hand, I felt the crumpled edge of a letter that no longer existed. That's when I realized. Every time I stepped into someone else's story, I was trying to fix my own. A few weeks later, the studio held a private screening of one of the films I'd worked on. The one with the train station. I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. When the scene came on, that one moment where I turned, looking for someone who never arrived, the camera lingered on my face just long enough for recognition to sting. The audience sighed softly. Some even clapped. But all I could think was, they didn't see me. They saw the woman I used to be. And for the first time since the war, I cried, not the quiet kind, but the kind that leaves you breathless. When the lights came up, the director found me in the lobby. "You did something rare." "Marlene," he said, "you made people feel something true." I smiled, but it hurt. It was true. That night, walking home past the glowing marquees and the smell of popcorn, I wondered if the world would ever remember me. Not as an actress, Not as a name on a call sheet, but as a heartbeat behind the background, a woman who stood where no one looked and made pretending feel real again. They say opportunity comes once in a lifetime. In Hollywood, it usually comes wearing a suit and carrying a script. It was late autumn when the studio called again. The man on the phone spoke quickly, as if afraid the words would run away before he finished them. "Miss Foster, the director wants to see you. Tomorrow morning." Stage 9. I almost said they had the wrong girl. I was just an extra, a face in the blur. But something in his voice, nervous, almost reverent, stopped me. The next day, the studio lot smelled of wet asphalt and paint. A fog had rolled in from the ocean, softening the edges of everything, making even the fake streets look real for once. Inside Stage 9, the lights hung low, like moons. The director, the same one who called me Miss Real, stood by a camera, flipping through pages. "Marlene," he said when he saw me. "You've been in more of my pictures than some of the stars. It's time people knew your name." He handed me a script. The title read, "Home Front." I laughed softly. "Another war picture," he smiled. "Not quite. This one's about what comes after." The role was small, but not silent. A widow who runs a boarding house for returning soldiers, one who listens more than she speaks. The kind of woman who holds everyone else's stories until they forget she has her own. I read the lines that night in my small apartment, the city lights trembling outside the window. Every word felt too close, too raw. When I reached a scene where the woman finds an unopened letter on her porch, I had to stop reading. My hands were shaking too hard. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I could act. On the first day of filming, the set was a perfect imitation of loneliness, creaky stairs, half-empty rooms, shadows that looked like memories. The director walked me through my first scene. "You don't have to do much," he said gently. "Just sit on the porch and open the letter." I froze. "Pretend it's the first one you've received in years," he continued. "You don't know who it's from. Could be bad news, could be hope. Pretend." The word rang in my ears. The camera rolled. I sat on the steps, the wooden planks rough under my hands. The envelope trembled as I lifted it, too light to be real, too heavy to be fake. When I tore it open, the paper made the same sound I remembered from my kitchen table years ago. I didn't have to imagine anything. The tears came before the line did. The director didn't call cut. He let it happen, the silence, the ache, the truth. When I finally looked up, the crew was still. Even the sound operator had stopped breathing. And then, softly, from somewhere behind the lights, the director whispered, "Beautiful." After that scene, things changed. People on set smiled when they saw me. The makeup artist started calling me Miss Foster instead of Doll. The wardrobe woman gave me an old scarf and said, "It suits your spirit," for the first time. I wasn't invisible. But at night, when I went home and washed off the makeup, I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and feel a strange kind of fear, not of failure, but of exposure. Because being seen meant being known. And being known meant letting the world see what I'd kept hidden for so long. Weeks passed. The film wrapped, the posters went up, and suddenly my name appeared on a line of credits that no one could miss. People wrote about me in small-town papers. "Newcomer brings real emotion to the screen." One critic said I had the face of every woman who ever waited. Another said my performance was too real to be comfortable. I read those words over and over, unsure if they were praise or warning. The premiere was held in a grand old theater on Hollywood Boulevard. As the lights dimmed and the film began, I sat in the back row, hidden by the dark. When my first scene appeared to me, on the porch, holding that letter, the audience fell silent. No one clapped, no one whispered. It was as if the whole room was breathing through me. And in that stillness, I realized something I hadn't understood before. For years, I'd been living in the background of my own life, waiting for a director, a line, a cue. But the truth was, I'd been writing the story all along. When the credits rolled, I slipped out quietly before the applause began. Outside, the night was cool and filled with neon. A couple walked past me, the woman holding her partner's arm, her laughter soft and familiar. I smiled, for the first time in a long while. I didn't feel like an extra anymore. I felt like someone who'd finally finished her scene. They said I had a gift. A way of making the quiet parts feel loud. But no one ever told me what to do when the applause stopped. By 1955, Hollywood was changing again. The stars got younger, the stories glossier. The war films faded into romance pictures and comedies. Real faces like mine, ones that carried too much truth, didn't fit so easily anymore. For a while, I kept working. A mother in one film. A landlady in another. I smiled on cue, cried on time, spoke lines written by people who'd never lived them. The lights were still bright, the script still neat, but something in me had gone quiet. When the studio offered me a lead role in a picture called Tomorrow's Women, I said no. The producer blinked. "You're turning down a starring role," I nodded. "It's not my story." He laughed. "It's everyone's story, sweetheart. Not mine," I said again. That night, walking home under the dim glow of street lamps, I passed by a small theater showing one of my old films. On the poster, my face was barely visible, a blur in the background of two lovers kissing. It should have made me sad, but instead, I smiled. Because I knew now, being in the frame wasn't the same as being remembered. Months later, I got a letter from the studio, the kind that came typed, polite, final. They were restructuring. My contract wouldn't be renewed. I folded the letter carefully, the way I used to fold James's. Then I placed it in a drawer beside my first call sheet, the one that said Diner Girl Number 3. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, listening to the city hum. The sound of cars, laughter, and old film reels spinning somewhere far away. It all mixed together like a lullaby for the forgotten. And I realized I wasn't sad. I was free. The years rolled by like in credits. People stopped recognizing me, and I liked it that way. I started working part-time at a small community theater, teaching young actors how to listen instead of just perform. I told them the truth. Acting isn't pretending to feel. It's remembering what you've forgotten, sometimes on rainy nights. The theater kids would crowd around and ask, "Miss Foster, did you ever love anyone from the movies?" And I'd smile, sip my tea, and say, "No." But once, the movies loved me. When I turned 60, I visited an old cinema that was closing down. Inside, the air smelled of dust and dreams. The projectionist recognized my name from the guest list. "You're in one of the reels we're showing tonight," he said. "An old war film." "You were the girl in the diner, right?" I nodded. He smiled kindly. "You know, that scene still gets people. Every time." I sat alone in the back as the projector hummed to life. On the screen, a young woman stood behind a counter, serving coffee. The light in her eyes was still there, that small, trembling flame that refused to go out. And for a fleeting second, it was like looking into a mirror that remembered what I'd once been. When the reel ended, the room stayed dark for a moment longer than usual. The projectionist called out, "Miss Foster, you all right?" I smiled into the dim glow. "Yes," I whispered. "Just Finishing my scene. Outside, Los Angeles shimmered as always, eternal, hungry, beautiful. I walked down the empty sidewalk. The smell of rain mixing with the faint sweetness of popcorn from the theater door. As I reached the corner, a young woman brushed past me, clutching a script to her chest, her face full of hope. For a moment, I almost stopped her, to tell her something, anything. But I didn't. Some stories you have to let people live for themselves. At home, I placed my old compact mirror on the windowsill. It caught the first light of morning and threw it gently across the room. On the back, the engraving was fading, but the reflection was still kind. I looked into it and smiled, not at who I was, but at every woman I'd ever played, the waitress, the widow, the extra, the dreamer. They were all still there, and so was I, because sometimes the most beautiful roles are the ones no one remembers by name. If this story brought you somewhere, back to a face, a sound, a feeling you thought you'd forgotten, don't let it fade away. Every like, every comment, every subscription helps keep these memories alive. Because here on Back When Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember what it felt like to live them.